Good morning, everyone, or good morning here in Chicago, where Data for the Common Good is based, wherever you happen to be. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Caitlin Pike, and I'm the Director of Communications here at Data for the Common Good, also known as D4CG here at UChicago. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to our 4th annual public webinar. We are delighted to have you all with us. We look forward to this event every year, and we're really excited to share with you today updates about our work and the vision for where we are headed. Just showing our agenda for today. As you can see, we will be giving updates from our group on a few different topics, and that will be interspersed with presentations from our 3 guest speakers today. And on the next slide, I'm showing those guest speakers. And I won't go into too much detail here, as Sam will be introducing them before they speak and telling you more about why we're so excited to hear from them. But I will mention that we do hope to also have time for 1 or 2 questions after each of these presentations. So you can enter any questions for these panelists in the same way you would the rest of your questions, either with the Q&A button or in the chat. And Sam will moderate 1 or 2 questions after each talk. Okay, that's all the housekeeping, and that brings me to this next slide, which is just, I wanted to start us off with a quick little reintroduction, because although, as I mentioned, today is our 4th annual public webinar, it is actually our first public webinar as Data for the Common Good. Those of you who have known us for a while know that before this, our group went by the same name as our primary project, which is the Pediatric Cancer Data Commons, or PCDC. And then this past January, we started going by this new name to reflect the larger scope of work that we're doing now. And this is the D4CG mission. We build communities, platforms, and ecosystems that maximize the potential of data to drive discovery and improve human health. On the next slide, I have just a little diagram showing how all of this fits together. So you can see that Data for the Common Good is our organization, and this group includes the Pediatric Cancer Data Commons, which is the project we were founded around. It's our largest project, our flagship, and we have a ton of updates about PCDC work to share with you today. And then you can see that D4CG also includes our other work, which extends out from what we've built with the Pediatric Cancer Data Commons. So we have Gearbox, a clinical trials matching tool. We're part of a group building a sociome data commons, which integrates clinical data with non-clinical social determinants of health. We're working on data commons for other rare diseases, including Predict, which is focused on monogenic diabetes. And you will hear updates today about all of these projects as well. It's all under the D4CG umbrella. And then finally, on the next slide, I have just a little history, and I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I wanted to take a step back and show you how we got to the place of becoming Data for the Common Good. As some of you may know, our earliest roots are way back in 2004 when the Neuroblastoma Consortium INRG was formed. And then in 2017, Instruct, the Soft Tissue Sarcoma Consortium, was formed. And in 2019, we partnered with MAGIC, a germ cell tumor consortium. And it was also around this time that we received more funding and were able to start to really do the work of creating the PCDC as one entity that would bring together many cancer types, have a shared platform and infrastructure, a shared data model, and streamline the work of building data commons. And then 2020 and 2021 just continued that. It was huge growth years for the PCDC. We brought in many more cancer types. We built the Gen 3 infrastructure for our data portal, which had a pilot release in 2021. And then during this time, we were also working on other projects that grew out of that work of the PCDC, most especially Gearbox. We also joined the Sociome group. And then last year and this year, we had the launch of the PCDC data portal, which we've continually been adding more data to. We continued to grow the PCDC with new cancer types and new partnerships. And then at the same time, we've begun to be able to really invest in our work of bringing our unique model for building a data commons to other rare diseases. And with that came the launch of our D4CG identity earlier this year. So now that you have had my little introductory bit of context on who we are and what brought us here, to get going with the rest of our program, I'm going to hand it over. So please join me in welcoming the Director of Data for the Common Good, pediatric oncologist, Dr. Sam Volchenbaum.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. Really appreciate that introduction. It's really exciting to be here with everyone today. We have a lot of exciting updates, and we have 3 incredible guest speakers that are going to be joining us. So I'm going to jump right in and get started. So this again just shows our progress across all of our groups. And this leaderboard we keep on our website, and we update it periodically to show that we have various versions of our data dictionary in progress, the number of data contributors, the consortia, and so forth. And I want to call your attention to a few things as we go through today about updates with our various groups. The portal has been updated now with data from germ cell tumors and Hodgkin lymphoma. You can see the updated numbers here. And then we've increased the number of neuroblastoma cases in the portal by almost 700 new cases. And we've added a large number of cases to the soft tissue sarcoma commons as well. So some major updates to the kinds of data and the sources of data that are very exciting for us. As we look at the growth over the past few years, obviously, the majority of our data for the first couple of years was from the neuroblastoma group. As Caitlin mentioned, we added in the rhabdomyosarcoma data over the last couple of years since 2017. And then this year, we're so excited to get data from our germ cell tumor consortium and our Hodgkin consortium in the commons. And we're hoping to add even more data in the portal by the end of the year. If you go in the Discovery portal, and everybody should, because it's public, you should see the data that are available from the various consortia. Over 25,000 neuroblastoma patients, almost 10,000 soft tissue sarcoma patients, over 1,000 germ cell tumor patients, and over 2,000 Hodgkin patients. Hopefully, by the end of the year, we'll have data from other consortia in the commons. If not very soon in early 24, we'll have the initial set of data coming into our hibiscus bone tumor commons and data coming into our AML commons, which is already harmonized and ready to go in. So we're very excited to get both of these sets of data into the commons and have those available to users who want to request data for research. New this year is the launch of some analytics tools in the Cohort Discovery browser. Hopefully, many of you have tried these. So we have Kaplan-Meier curve generator, which allows you to come in and do some cohort discovery and then some hypothesis generation. Of course, when we first launched this idea, there were some concerns about how this could be used. And we got a lot of feedback from our statistician friends giving us insight into how a tool like this could be misused. So with the help of one of our D4CG faculty, Kirk Wyatt, we went ahead and spent almost a year and a half looking at different ways in which the portal could be used, different types of ways that the hypothesis generation tool could be misused, perhaps. And so, Kirk spent almost a year of intense work surveying the community, coming up with a bunch of safeguards that you can see listed here, videos, acceptable use policy, watermarking. And then we did a study where we looked at how many portal users we had, how they were using the portal, just to make sure that folks weren't misusing the tool. And actually, Kirk pulled all this into a publication that he presented at SIOP in Ottawa this month. So this is exciting work, and we're really happy to work with the statisticians to produce a tool that not only is useful to those who want to do research, but also provides safeguards against misuse. We've had almost 600 registered portal users with about 250 active just over the past few months. Lots of people are using the curve generator, so we know that it's useful. But at the same time, we've been, of course, monitoring it to make sure that it's not being misused. We would love for all of you to go into the portal and to try it out and to take advantage of all the data that we have available now. If you look at where our users are coming from, this is, again, is just the users of the portal coming from all over the world. These are folks that have come in and registered using their email address. But the bar is low to use just the cohort discovery because we want people to see what data are available. So we've gotten use from all over the world at people looking at the portal, and we hope to increase through some outreach activities the numbers of users who will use the portal for cohort discovery. So just a few words about some of the behind the scenes work that we've been doing. Caitlin mentioned our Fanconi anemia project. This is a wonderful partnership which took over a year to mature, and we worked with the Fanconi anemia group, which is very, very well structured. The Fanconi Anemia Research Foundation came to us asking us for help and ideas for building a data commons, and we told them about our procedure, our process. They were really impressed. We had many meetings with them, with their board, with their users, which all culminated in the funding of a project to build a Fanconi anemia data commons. And we went out to Vancouver to their annual meeting and we presented, and it's going to be a really exciting partnership. You can see also that we formed 2 new consortia around nasopharyngeal carcinoma and oncofertility. The nasopharyngeal carcinoma consortium is called NOBLE. We have the MOU in progress right now. We're wrapping up the data dictionary, and we held our first in-person meeting at SIOP in Ottawa this month. This includes 6 collaborators, those listed here. So as you can see, it's a worldwide collaboration, including folks from Germany, from Turkey, India, and others. So we're very excited to bring this group together around building the NPC data commons. Our hope, or reproductive hope, oncofertility commons is an amazing group of collaborators from all over the country looking at oncofertility. And of course, this brings together not only oncologists but gynecologists, fertility experts, and so forth. And bringing this group together has allowed us to think about better ways to store and share data related to fertility preservation. It's very early days for this group. We're working on the MOU and working on the data dictionary, trying to identify funding source to keep this work going, and we're very excited about this consortium. A couple other updates, again, behind the scenes. The data dictionary for brain tumors is completed, the first version of it. Of course, our data dictionaries are live, so we know that it will change, but the first version is locked down, and you should feel free to look at it on our website. I mentioned the increase in neuroblastoma data, and part of that's due to St. Jude data we now have in the Commons. We've worked very hard with St. Jude to put the right kind of sharing agreements in place so we can share the data that St. Jude is providing us. It was also a challenge because St. Jude, of course, has patients that are also on COG studies, and so we had to figure out a way to make sure we knew which patients coming in were also COG patients. And so that took some technical work to make sure we understood how to do that. And then we finally have our MOU signed for our global reach, or our retinoblastoma consortium, which is a pretty amazing effort considering the number and scope of collaborators that are involved with the retinoblastoma consortium. This is one of my favorite slides, and I always show it in my talks. I just never fail to be impressed with the work that our regulatory folks have been able to put in place, working with groups all over the world, complying with GDPR and UK data protection, HIPAA. I can't tell you the number of times somebody has said, oh, we won't be able to take data from this group, and 6 months later or a year later, sometimes 2 years later, we get data from that group because we've been able to comply with all of the regulation. We have data in our commons from all over the world with identifiers that can allow those groups to update the data. We're working very hard on better ways to put these data agreements in place. And some of us actually are going to a data sharing meeting next month that is focused on how the US and Europe can share data better, especially around clinical and genomic data. We're working to check off the last few boxes for pediatric cancer. We have coverage over almost all types of pediatric cancer. We're still working on a few. We're still trying to get Wilms tumor up and running. We have a lot of work to go with ALL, but for the most part, I think we're covering almost all pediatric cancers. And if folks have input on how we can better get at some of the more rare types of pediatric cancer, we would love to work with groups that are interested in building out data commons. So we've taken a fresh approach with several team members' help, especially Caitlin, on how we display our research that comes out of the data commons. And remember, our group at UChicago is not a party to doing the research on the tumor types themselves. Our research is very much focused on, like what you saw, how to do better in-browser analytics, how to do better data extraction, how to build data commons. But of course, our groups are furiously using the data to write papers and to publish their findings. And we wanted to make sure that those were highlighted in an easy to use way. So we launched these different project views, which will allow you to look at the research being done by each consortium. So each consortium will have a separate page, and the page will be sortable by column. We'll have the date of the publication, the PI, the other authors, a description of the work, and so forth. You can click the links to see more details about the project. You can filter by project status, and then once the papers are published, you can click a link to go to the paper. We think this is incredibly useful, not just from a research standpoint, but for advocates, for funders, for anybody who wants to see all the work that's coming out of the Commons. We have a list of our recent publications on our website that you can look at as well. We're very aware of making sure that we understand how the data commons is having an impact on patient care. So you'll find papers like this one from Steve Du Bois looking at a very rare type of neuroblastoma and looking at the prognostic features of that tumor type. There are papers from our Instruct, our rhabdomyosarcoma consortium, looking at diagnostic predictors of outcomes or imaging predictors for non-rhabdo soft tissue. So I think you will see as you look at these publications that the data are being used very productively to change clinical practice. And then, as I mentioned, we will publish our own papers, but they're focused on the science of building data commons. So this was a paper that was led by Kirk Wyatt on the soft tissue sarcoma consortium, and we have had several other papers now that we've been working on that describe the process of building data commons. A few words about the community, because we've had a really busy year, and a lot of our year has been devoted to trying to get the word out about our group. And so we've tried hard to be present at meetings, to be in person. We've had these display booths, like in the top right, at several meetings this year, including this month at SIOP. We presented at ASCO with Lindsay Frazier, one of our who runs our MAGIC consortium, along with Ned Sharpless, the former NCI director. We had our own in-person event where Dr. Sharpless came and spoke. We went overseas to the neuroblastoma meeting where our Brian Ferner had a platform oral presentation about his work and Sue Cohn's work doing EHR data extraction. So we've really had an exciting time getting the word out, and we're going to continue to do that. We think it's very important to engage directly with the community, to talk with our users, and especially as we grow, to make sure that we hear from our users and our donors, our community, our advocates. And we're going to continue to try to be present at these meetings. These meetings often involve, not just going to having a booth or having a talk, but actually doing work. And so we've had several meetings where we have data dictionary get-togethers where we engage groups very closely at actually the work of the consortium. So here on the right was us at SIOP with a small but effective rhabdomyosarcoma meeting with Instruct. And then at the Fanconi meeting in Vancouver, we had engagement of this incredible room full of international collaborators. There were so many countries represented here with so many wonderful questions about how we're going to be bringing the Fanconi community together to build this data commons. It is important that we continue to try to get the word out through formal talks. I was able to give a talk in Valencia at the European SIOP meeting. As I mentioned, Brian gave a great talk at the ANR meeting. I mentioned the talk with Dr. Sharpless and Lindsay Frazier at the ASCO meeting. Susie Burrs gave a talk at the Factor conference in New Orleans, and Kirk gave a talk at the SIOP meeting in Ottawa, and you see a picture of that here. So I think these talks are very important. We're going to keep doing them, going to keep applying for them. And so I think if there's suggestions from anyone about how we can increase our international presence, what are the best ways to get the word out about the work we're doing, we'd love to hear that. So we took a big jump and hosted an annual meeting in Chicago this year. This was an amazing amount of work. We hosted the Informatics Technology for Cancer Research annual meeting for the NCI. We brought 150 people to UChicago. The entire team worked very hard on this, especially Kat Buzine, who spent 10 or so months intensely working on this meeting. We had cancer informaticians from all over the country come present their work. We had talks and posters and social sessions. It was a really amazing meeting, and the feedback has been very positive. We had keynote speakers both from the university as well as international speakers and an advocate speaker as well. You can see on the top left, I dragged out as many people as I could to a sunrise run on the lakefront. 10, 12 people is not too bad to get out at 5:45 in the morning on a meeting day. So that was good. And you can see the meeting space at the bottom. It was just a packed room at our premier event space on campus, and it was a great meeting. And we have the materials archived, and if people want to look at them, I'd be happy to share them. Just to mention that we were very invested in our advisory groups. And so 2 years ago, we formed our scientific advisory committee, which are experts on the pediatric cancer data commons. We formed an external advisory board last year, which are not necessarily PCDC folks. In fact, we have a lot of just experts in international data sharing, and they've been very helpful in helping us understand the ethics and legal and other issues around doing this type of large data sharing. And then we're so excited to launch our Adolescent and Young Adult Research Council, the ARC, this year. And part of the excitement, of course, is you're going to hear from Mike Roth in his talk. But we were just so excited to bring together folks from the AYA community to figure out how to leverage the PCDC data in a way that is going to be productive for AYA research. And it's not a very straightforward ask. And so we're really looking to this group to help us determine what the best research path is forward for those data. The way we think about our groups, so many of you have seen this picture, we have our interacting consortia on the bottom left, we have our international advisory groups that we report up to, and then our team is really the service team that is performing the work to keep the data commons going. So I'm going to stop sharing in a second, but I want to introduce our first invited speaker. I'll be back later to talk more about other aspects of the data commons. Mike Roth is at MD Anderson, where he's associate professor in PEDS. He directs their cancer survivorship program, and he co-directs the AYA program. Mike has been an incredible advocate for the PCDC and a wonderful partner. He brought us to the International AYA meeting in Long Beach this year, where he ran an incredible meeting bringing together 3 large AYA groups from around the world, and was really able to help feature PCDC in many ways there that allowed us to engage with this community. So I'm so excited Mike agreed to come talk today. He's going to tell us about his work, and he's been just a terrific partner, and we're looking forward to continued collaboration with him. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Mike, and hopefully this will be a seamless transition.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam, first for inviting me, and thanks for the partnership. Your group has actually been absolutely incredible in terms of advocating for AYA data sharing and data commons, and I'm really just fortunate to be a part of the work that you guys are leading. If someone can give me a thumbs up that you see my screen.
Everything's good.
Perfect. All right, so let's get started. So I wanted to start by introducing the AYA cancer population and the need for data commons. So who are AYAs? So we're talking about adolescents and young adults who've been diagnosed with cancer between the ages of 15 to 39 years. This is still a rare cancer or a rare population. It's less than 100,000 patients in the US every year are diagnosed with cancer. But this population is growing, and the number of survivors are large and growing. So there's over 600,000 survivors of AYA cancer. And given improved survival rates, the population continues to grow. Importantly, this is a pretty wide age range, 15 to 39. It's a group that has traditionally been left behind. There's been a lot more focus on younger patients and older patients. And that's why there really is a need to understand and address the needs of this patient population. Younger AYA is more likely to be diagnosed with leukemia, lymphoma. Older AYA is more likely to be diagnosed with breast cancer, melanoma, colorectal cancer. So this is a very heterogeneous group, which makes it very challenging to further improve outcomes. So where do our AYAs receive cancer? They receive their cancer treatment across a variety of settings. So younger AYAs are often treated in a pediatric center, perhaps in children's hospitals or in a smaller community setting that focuses on pediatrics. As you get into the late teenage years and then to the 20s, most, if not all, patients are treated in adult centers. with many of those patients treated in community centers compared to academic centers. And you can imagine there's a lot of silos between pediatric and medical oncology, a lot of silos between community cancer care as well as academic cancer care. Importantly, we have seen improvements in survival for the population. So overall survival actually mirrors overall survival for younger patients, for pediatric cancer patients. So if you take all comers, 5-year overall survival is about 85%. And this has improved meaningfully over the past few decades. However, there are a number of diagnoses where we have not made much progress over the years. Specifically, if you look for patients, if you look at patients with osteosarcoma, we still use the same treatment we used in the 1980s, and survival has not budged at all. Patients with CNS tumors, colorectal cancer, we're really struggling with a few of these malignancies, and we really need to understand how we can incorporate novel agents to improve their survival. There's a number of disparities based on care setting by sociodemographics, and we only have reached the tip of the iceberg of understanding why these disparities occur. We know that treatment location does impact overall survival. If you look at the figures on the right, patients AYAs with acute lymphoblastic leukemia or AYAs with central nervous system tumors, if they're treated at an academic center versus a community center, they have improved outcomes. We do not yet know or understand the reasons underlying this disparity in outcomes. If we look at sociodemographics, socioeconomic status, race and ethnicity, all of these factors impact survival, and it's concerning that we have not been able to decrease the disparity over time. If you're looking at data from the Texas Cancer Registry, and there's been similar data from SEER, and what the data consistently show is disparities, those who have fewer socioeconomic means, fewer resources, and those who are Black race or Hispanic ethnicity have poorer survival. And we have not been able to catch up to those with more resources or those non-Hispanic white populations. Extremely importantly is that survival is not everything. Quality of life matters. If you think about your own life when you were an adolescent or a young adult, or perhaps you're lucky to still be in that age range, there are so many life milestones that are important. Think about how a cancer diagnosis impacts each of those life milestones, and it does not make life easier. For most patients, it just compounds and makes it very challenging to achieve certain life goals, and it changes the trajectory of many patients' lives. We have very little data on how cancer impacts patients' health and quality of life, both during and after cancer treatment. Making it even more challenging and more important to capture our AYAs data is the fact that AYAs enroll on cancer clinical trials at the lowest rate of any population. The figure on the top left, you can see this valley in AYA enrollment on NCI-sponsored trials. The figure on the top right, you can see that as patients get into their 20s, very few AYAs enroll on trials. What's interesting is that AYAs enroll onto cancer clinical trials at a similar rate to older adults, patients in their 70s and 80s. However, the denominator is many fewer for AYAs, and thus we must enroll, similar to pediatric cancer patients, a much higher rate of patients or proportion of patients in order to be powered to actually ask and answer important scientific questions. The fewer AYAs that enroll on cancer clinical trials, the fewer biospecimens we have, the fewer targets we're able to identify to develop and create new drugs and develop phase 3 clinical trials. Importantly, over the past decade, we have really moved the needle in terms of increasing collaboration between pediatric and medical oncology and developing collaborative clinical trials. This is a list last year of those clinical trials that were developed together between pediatric and medical oncology within the NCI's clinical trials network. This list continues to grow and expand. Importantly, what happens with this data next is really important, adding weight to what Sam and the group is doing within the Pediatric Data Commons. When we look at health-related quality of life and the measurement of health-related quality of life, we see that very few studies in AYA oncology actually measure quality of life. Less than 1 in 5 studies will include a patient-reported outcome endpoint. And those studies that actually do include the measurement of health-related quality of life, the domains they assess and the inventories they utilize to measure quality of life are all over the map, really impairing our ability to compare outcomes across groups or even within disease groups. We have done a lot of work over the past 3 years to incorporate quality of life patient-reported outcomes within our AYA trials. And here you can see 5 trials that are either currently active or planned that are incorporating patient-reported outcomes. Again, it's one thing to collect the data. It's much more important regarding what you do with these data. The biggest challenge we have in AYA oncology, and it's the biggest challenge we've had for the past 4 decades, is are really the silos that exist. The silos that exist between pediatric and medical oncology, between site of care. Data that are collected are almost never shared, whether these are survival data, treatment data, toxicity data, biology or imaging data. They're not shared between trials. So pediatric groups will collect some data, the adult groups will collect other data on the relevant population, and it's really difficult to do these studies where we're trying to understand what are the main contributing factors, understanding disparities in care. And that's really where the data commons comes in. It's the bridge. It's taking down these silos to make sure that we're leveraging and utilizing all of the data we're collecting to not only understand disparities in care and outcomes, but to move the needle and improve outcomes. So let's talk a little bit more about what we've been doing with data for the common good. And I really like this slide because we started with the pediatric cancer data commons, and we've noted the importance over the years of focusing on the AYA population and not just saying they're a subset of pediatric cancers or they're a subset of adult cancers, but they're its own unique entity. So really importantly, and I have to give Sam's group and Susie and others a ton of credit for really trying to understand the governance and how we actually do this. It's one thing to propose this and to say it's important. It's another thing to actually put this into action and to make it happen. So we've been working for a while with the PCDC on the AYA advisory group. And the guiding principles underlying this advisory group is that there's all of this wonderful data from each of the disease groups you can see in the consortia, and it's currently grouped with the pediatric data. And our goal is to foster the inclusion of more AYA data from both the pediatric groups as well as the adult groups, and then identify processes to be able to do these within disease group and cross disease group AYA analyses. It doesn't really sound easy, and it's not easy in terms of just the governance because all of the different consortia have their own ways of sort of handling their data and developing research questions. But that is really the charge of the AYA advisory group. So there's been a lot of thought behind what is the goal and purpose of this advisory group, and we're really here to provide strategic and operational guidance on how to do this AYA cross-disease science. How do we ask AYA relevant questions? How do we coordinate between groups? Importantly, making sure that we have key stakeholders involved in the decision-making, but also we respect the autonomy of each of the groups who has been doing this for quite some time and have figured out their own independent processes. So the proposed scope and responsibilities of the AYA Research Council are threefold. It's strategic, operational, and research. Strategically, we're thinking about sort of the AYA population from a little bit of a different angle. What are the ethical considerations? What are the key AYA research topics that we need to address? Operationally, how do we foster interaction between the disease groups who currently hold all of this data? And then what are the key research questions? And that's a lot of our goal is to take the 360-degree view and say, what are the key questions that we need to ask for AYAs, not just within a specific disease group, but across the age group and the population. We've been very thoughtful about including the key stakeholders. So membership, you can see here, I won't go through all of the folks, but I will say that we have representation from all of the groups, statisticians, most importantly, patient advocates. This is an international group, and we, of course, have folks from the data commons as well to help guide us. The request process, without going into too many details, but there's sort of multiple request processes. We are not impinging upon the independence of each of the consortiums. So, for internal data analyses and requests, each of the groups is going to continue to use their current process. We are here really to help guide data requests across multiple groups, and we'll help with those data reviews. But we're also here to provide the scientific expertise and propose new research projects specifically across disease groups within the AYA population. This is a really, quick and hopefully efficient way of sharing the need for AYA data commons and how we've been able to partner with Sam and their group to really sort of put this into place. In conclusion, we actually are making good progress for adolescents and young adults diagnosed with cancer, but we need to speed up that progress. There is so much data that exists that are not being utilized and not being leveraged, and it just is sitting there. And this is such an important opportunity to make sure that we do leverage and utilize all of the data collected and all data that is currently being collected, because we are starting to actually collect more health-related quality of life and other endpoints. The data commons, this really for us is a priority. This is the way we make progress, and this is the way we make progress together. I want to thank Sam for the invitation and all of you who are contributing to this work. This is, like everything in AYA oncology, it's a team effort, and just so many thanks to the organizers and to everyone who's been participating.
Thanks, Mike. That's wonderful. It's amazing to see how you've thought about this enormous thing and distilled it down to its components. One of the questions I have is, and I know we've thought a lot about this, we've been mainly just pushing on pediatric data for a long time, but to do AYA effectively, we're really going to have to work with adult consortia, not just the NCI ones, but adult groups from all over the world, who may not be as forthcoming with data sharing. And I'm curious how you plan on finding counterparts, or how we hope to leverage the whole community together.
Yeah, that is such an important question, and it's the key question and challenge we've had within AYA oncology. It's really about partnerships. I think we had the same challenge about a decade ago when we first proposed developing these joint AYA cancer clinical trials, and the real answer and the approach was sit in the same room together. Now maybe it's be on Zoom a little bit more as well, but these are partnerships. This is not pediatric oncology trying to take medical oncology data. This is a group effort between medical and pediatric oncology, doing what's right for patients. We have made, as you know, great progress with our adult colleagues in AML. There's been full agreement to share data from the adult AML SWOG trials, as well as the other NCTAN adult groups. I think what will happen is we'll have a few early wins showing that we can do this and we can do this well. This is what happened with our clinical trials, and now we're seeing this sort of this great age of collaborative cancer clinical trials. I think we'll see the same thing with data commons. We just need to show that this can and will work, and we're able to accelerate progress.
That's great. Thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate this, and we loved having you here. And your recording will be part of what we put out. And I'm sure if people have questions, they can run them through us, or they can ask you directly.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks, Mike. Okay, I'm going to move on, and then we'll obviously come up to our other speakers in a moment. But I wanted to take a few minutes to tell you, to piggyback on what Mike started talking about, looking at outcomes in patients, and so we started thinking about how we would follow somebody through their lifetime. And obviously there's a lot of things in place for kids once they're finished being treated, to get information about their treatment and to go forward. But our conversations with survivors have really told us that there is a big part of this that's lacking. So we've been thinking a lot about this and how we could leverage the data commons to help tackle this important area. We've been focusing on the data, right? So there's all of the pediatric and AYA data from folks who have cancer when they're adults, and we want to try to connect all these dots together. So we've been thinking a lot about cancer predisposition syndromes and working with groups that study predisposition, but importantly also thinking about the secondary effects of treatment, whether it's late effects or secondary malignancies, and what happens to kids once they finish treatment and move on into adulthood. We've worked with several groups now on cancer predisposition. We've had a long-standing collaboration with the folks at C3P, the Consortium for Childhood Cancer Predisposition. We're helping them build up their data commons, and we've been working with them to understand how to build data standards for collecting data on cancer predisposition. I mentioned the Fanconi anemia work we're doing, as well as the reproductive hope, looking at outcomes. So I think these are three groups, two looking at predisposition, one looking at outcomes, that are going to give us some better insights into this journey, this cancer journey. But and then one more important effort I want to let you know about. This is probably the first time I'm bringing this up during a webinar. We've been working with the Accelerate group on looking at outcomes for patients that are treated with immunocancer therapy. So we're still in the stages of formulating what this project is going to look like, but ultimately we hope to build a collaborative platform where hospitals can enter data on patients who've been treated with these novel agents, can enter long-term follow-up information for these patients, and then we can provide that information back either to pharmaceutical sponsors or back to the hospitals themselves. This is a very exciting project, and we're, again, in the early stages of coming up with the contracting, but we hope to get this started sometime in early 24. So Greg Armstrong gave me a couple slides that he uses when he talks about late effects and long-term outcomes. This is looking at the number of excess deaths from cancer in the pediatric population that occur within 5 years of diagnosis. And again, this is all comers for cancer. And over the period that's shown here from 1985 to 2015, there was a steady decrease in the number of expected deaths in the pediatric age group within 5 years of a cancer diagnosis. So obviously, we've been making great progress. This curve is definitely showing that we're having great improvements in how we take care of kids with cancer. And if we look at something like acute lymphoblastic leukemia, we've seen an enormous drop in this case, in the number of deaths that would be expected within 5 years of diagnosis. And over the last, couple of years, a fall in the number of deaths that would be expected in the 5 to 10 year age group, and a slight fall in the number of deaths expected in the greater than 10 age group. But if we look at other diseases like Hodgkin or brain tumors, the story is not the same. And if you look at the blue here, the width of the blue bar gets much smaller over time, showing our ability to take care of these kids and get them cured within 5 years of diagnosis. But if you look at the red here, we're losing this battle later on. So as we get more than 10 years out from diagnosis, we're seeing an enormous increase in early death in folks that were treated. And those are obviously due to late effects and secondary malignancies. And we really think that this is an important area to not only study, but to help arm patients with the tools they need to help take care of themselves as they move into adulthood. I think these two slides, the ALL and Hodgkin one, are just incredibly impactful when you put them side by side. So kids finish their therapy, they finish their chemo. Every hospital has a different way of handling the end of therapy and having kids, quote, graduate to the next phase. And then a lot of, kids become teenagers and they move on with their life. They go to college, they move, they get married, they have kids, and then things happen, right? So you could have a 35-year-old who had ALL as a kid, is wondering, are they going to have fertility problems? Are they have trouble applying for insurance? Any questions about getting vaccinations, or what about these weird, orthopedic pains I'm having? I think it's really critical to give survivors the resources they need to help answer these questions. The data that are really important are obviously the diagnostic data, the treatment data on the side effects that they had. But what's becoming really apparent is that we need longitudinal data. We need data over the course of the patient's treatment. As Mike reported, we need better patient-reported outcomes, looking at mood, depression, even things like financial problems, financial toxicity. Patients should be able to give their providers the most up-to-date long-term follow-up guidelines. Everything should be centralized and always available for somebody to have access to. We need to think about how we do consent. And of course, it wouldn't be D4CG if we didn't say that it had to be underpinned with rigorous standards and data governance. So the current state for many people, for many kids with cancer, is that they are treated for cancer. And then when they're done, somebody pulls out a bunch of printouts or PDFs and gives them to the parent. This is a tedious manual process, pulling out information and printing out hard to read notes from residents and attending physicians about the treatment. The parents can take the stack of data and hopefully they won't misplace it. Hopefully it'll be collated. And then when the kid grows up and moves away, will they have access to these printouts, this information when they go see their doctor? Will their doctor know what the patient had? Will their doctor know what the most important follow-ups are for that patient? This is not a great system, and it's one in which we hear time and time again that as kids move through their teen years and then become adults, they just don't have access to the information. Now, through projects like Passport for Care and other standardized projects, we're moving to a system where kids do get, or parents do get standardized forms. So a research nurse or a physician will pull information out of the EHR, and then they'll fill out these standardized forms. They'll give them to the patients, and those standardized forms could end up in a stack of papers again, like the other printouts, but at least they're standardized and they're predictable as to what's going to be in those forms. We hope that information can be made accessible in the long term for patients, but it's not obvious that patients will have easy access to this information, and it's not obvious that the doctors that they see will have access to the most important long-term follow-up guidelines for those patients. Now, once you add in here repeated longitudinal visits, this process breaks down pretty quickly and isn't scalable, because if a patient goes to the same doctor again and again for follow-up, or if they go to other centers, let's say somebody has some cardiac problems and they go to another state to get follow-up, how are those data going to be part of this patient's longitudinal record that they can use for long-term follow-up? So we've been thinking a lot about this, and we've gotten some funding from Team Brightside and from other sources to think about how we would move forward with a vision for long-term follow-up. So again, go back to this child who's finishing their therapy. What we'd hope to have happen is that no matter where they're seen, there would be ways to get their data out of the EHR and into a long-term follow-up data commons. And again, this is often a showstopper for people. They're like, well, you'll never get data out of the EHRs. That's simply not true anymore. There are many ways to do this. We've often thought of the EHRs as like this prison for electronic for our patients' data. It doesn't have to be that way. You know, patient data will live in Epic and Cerner and other EHRs, and the patients can, working with the patients and working with different technologies, we can get the data out of these EHRs. And we can even, in some cases, get some de-identified data or get some data out of the COG that's important for these patients' long-term follow-up, removing information, say, about the study or the trial they were on that might be proprietary. So I don't think these data need to be locked away. I think we can get at the data. We can solve these technical challenges of getting the data into a long-term follow-up data commons. We have to come up with an honest broker system, and I don't need to get too technical, but we have to know if a patient seen at 3 institutions is the same patient or a different patient. Each institution will have their own IDs, and we can try to match on some identifiers, but we have to come up with a way to know that John Smith seen at CHOP is the same John Smith seen at Dana-Farber, and there are ways to do that. There's an honest brokering system being developed by the National Cancer Institute, which will help us do that, and there's other technical ways to do the matching on patients. We must have a cloud-based computable consent. And when I say electronic consent, I don't mean that somebody has a DocuSign e-sig on a PDF. That's a step forward if we can put that into a data commons. But what we really need is a way to have electronic consent where we can compute and say, all right, who consented for this? Who consented for that? Who's turning 18 and needs to be reconsented? These are all the things you can do with a cloud-based computable consent that you can't do with either an e-sig, an e-sign, or just a paper consent form. We have to give the patients and their family a unique code, and that code should associate them forever with their long-term follow-up data. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't lose it. Of course, they can lose it, and we have to have a process in place for people to get their information again. But we need to empower patients and their families with something that will give them perpetual access to their information. They shouldn't be calling around trying to get records out of an EHR, trying to figure out where their data are. How many 20-year-old college students are going to be able to do that? We need to make it easy for them to have the information. When kids turn 18, they need to be reconsented, and having a cloud-based computable consent will allow this reconsent process. It's absolutely critical. we should gamify this. We should have an app and a website where the patient can see exactly what's there. They can access their records. They can decide how they want to share their records, and they can actually have access to patient-reported outcome screens. Imagine the power of being able to send a patient every year a depression screen or a screen about their activity or something about their quality of life perpetually, and having consent to do that and having consent to use those data for research. Imagine the power of doing that. We could even collect data from wearables and devices and sensors, and you know, the technology is just going to grow for our ability to do these things. So why not get consent and have patients provide this information to enrich the data? Patients, of course, are involved in support communities, and we should engage those communities to be part of this. We should allow patients to get information about these communities and to join these communities, and we can help create those opportunities. The long-term follow-up data commons can provide automatic reminders to do all these things. It can provide it to the parents, it can provide it to the patients and other caregivers given the right consent. And this data flow is going to be, you know, a two-way data flow. It's incredibly powerful to go back to the patients and ask them for more data. Now, of course, we want these data to end up in a research data commons. So the data should be de-identified and put into a research data commons alongside their other data. Imagine the power of having follow-up data for somebody who was treated, you know, if we follow them for 10, 20 years, and to put that alongside the clinical trial data that we already have in the data commons. And of course, the real power here is when this patient gives their doctor that barcode, and that barcode gives the doctor or clinician the right access that they've been authorized for from the patient to access their medical records. And again, the power lies with the patient here, right? You know, they can decide, I want the doctor to have access to these records from these places for this amount of time, and they actually have the total power over the consent process. We hope that this long-term follow-up commons will work with you know, groups like ASCO and COG and other cooperative groups to provide the most up-to-date long-term follow-up guidelines. And so when that patient sees that physician, the physician not only gets the patient records, but can have immediate access to the long-term follow-up guidelines. And one of the things that we know is that patients, especially out, or physicians, especially out in the community, may not be up to date on the most important long-term follow-up guidelines because they just don't take care of a lot of patients who are survivors of pediatric cancer. This is an incredible opportunity to make sure that that information goes out to the physician. So we think this is an incredibly powerful model. Of course, it's going to change. Of course, this is all like pie in the sky at this point. But from those we've spoken to and from our initial discussions with many different stakeholders, we really think this is the way we need to move. And all these pieces can be put together. We think the work that we've done with data standards and with data aggregation will really help power this process. The automatic curation from the EHR is absolutely critical. You know, it's never going to be 100%, but we have to get away from having a CRA or somebody manually abstract every single data element. We have the technology now to do automatic curation of data, and we have to use the tools at our disposal, whether they're scripts or applications or AI tools, to figure out the right data to pull out of the EHR. As I mentioned, this computable electronic consent, absolutely critical, and there's already groups that are working on this as part of the Moonshot initiative. Data standards, of course, have to be behind everything so we can bind everything to our common data elements. The central repository, I think, is critical. I think if we try to keep the data federated in these EHR systems, it's going to be much harder for the patient to get a holistic view of their longitudinal care. And as I mentioned, it has to be disambiguated so we know which patients are the same, across different institutions. There's a broad agreement across institutions that families should have access to this. We need to make sure that we educate clinicians that this is something that's going to be helpful for their patients. The clinicians and other caregivers have to be invested in this process and have to be stakeholders. The centralization of long-term follow-up guidelines is something that many have tried, and there are great centralized repositories, but they need to be specific for the patient at hand. And then, of course, we need engagement of families and advocates, and we're working very hard to make sure that that's actually one of our first stops is discussion of this this vision with patients and advocates. Okay, so I want to shift over to talking about national initiatives, and we've had a long-standing collaboration with the National Cancer Institute, and I'm really lucky to have with us today Dr. Jaime Guidry Auvil, who's going to be talking about cancer data sharing. I've known Jaime for a very long time. She's a very close collaborator. She's the director of the NCI's Office of Data Sharing, and so I've known her for many years in that role. But one thing about Jaime is that she has incredible vision about how the NCI works. And so she's been able to use her smarts and her vision to actually have enormous impact at the NCI. And we've been very lucky to work closely with her. She has provided great oversight for the CCDI project, the Childhood Cancer Data Initiative. And I've relied on Jaime to be a close friend and colleague for many years. So I'm so excited she's here to present today. I saw that she was on the webinar, so I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Jaime. There she is. Hey, Jaime. Hopefully you get off of mute as well.
Okay, I think
can
that's
hear
it.
you, can hear you and can see you. Okay, thanks, Jaime. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sam, for that introduction and really for the whole morning. This has been fantastic to hear the points made and to hear the AYA perspectives from Dr. Roth. So thank you so much for inviting me to talk a bit about our collaborative efforts, as Sam was mentioning. So as we've seen and just saw on Sam's slides, we are certainly living in a digital age, and each of us rapidly using data to inform all areas of our life and at this point, but the biomedical research and healthcare fields remain woefully behind others in our ability to really leverage the power of the data that we're collecting. And so it's exciting to be here today learning about efforts that are moving the research and clinical care field forward with data, and in particular using pediatrics as the exemplar. I'm very pleased to add to this discussion today with some highlights of the work that my office is doing with Sam and the whole PCDC team in this space. Let's see if we'll advance. Okay, so as many of you are probably aware, the NCI has been prioritizing data sharing as a critical part of the scientific process and ultimately precision care in oncology for many years. And that focus has been much more purposeful since the launch of the Cancer Moonshot initially more than 6 years ago. And in that time, our office has really been working with NCI programs and leadership to establish the best approaches to broad data sharing for multiple types of data that will result in the greatest public benefit. So we love that we've been shifted to data for the common good. We absolutely agree. One such critical program is our Childhood Cancer Data Initiative, or the CCDI, as Sam was mentioning, which is really NCI's latest flagship data sharing effort. And the CCDI, as you can see, focuses on pediatric cancers that occur in children, adolescents, and young adults, because they represent a wide range of individual solid and hematologic disease that are both singly and collectively rare with respect to many cancers that occur in our older populations. And we very much appreciate that the childhood and AYA cancer communities are highly collaborative, motivated to work towards common goals, and regularly share data and resources with one another to benefit these young patients, and certainly are an exemplar in this space for some of our medical oncology projects. And for those reasons, NCI really does intend to use this CCDI initiative as an exemplar to inform how data sharing for all NCI studies could be addressed moving forward. CCDI is using each critical piece of data, and you'll hear a little bit more about this, to really help the research and clinical care communities complete that larger puzzle and bringing it all together, providing a larger picture, like Sam was referencing, that is really needed to understand each individual cancer, but also collectively improve the lives of our children, survivors, families, both now and long into the future. So CCDI is really intended to be a community effort committed to learning from every child by using data to really improve those treatments, the quality of life, and survivorship, as was mentioned this morning. But it's allowing us the opportunity to not only generate and collect new data, but also to look across NCI investments that we've already made in childhood cancers and think about how those can be linked and leveraged to really increase our progress, to learn more about the disease biology and treatment response, and to ultimately drive that cultural shift we're seeking in how we use and work with the data. And we are confident that using CCDI to bring these data sets together in a thoughtful and meaningful way will begin to provide that firm foundation for the insights and innovation that this data-focused initiative can produce for many years to come, and certainly PCDC is doing as well. CCDI has established some foundational goals to optimally use data to learn from and treat every patient, pediatric, adolescent, young adult survivors and their families again. And to this end, CCDI is focused its efforts on achieving those goals in 3 critical areas that include aggregating and generating multimodal longitudinal data from all patients with a pediatric cancer to comprehensively learn about those cancers in our children, adolescents, young adults, working to develop a strategy for clinical and research characterization, that the approaches that will collect the right information for proper diagnosis and treatment of various types of cancers. And most importantly, creating the infrastructure and tools that will make it easy to access and use those data for all stakeholders within the community and not just specific groups, as we've heard. In its first 3 years, CCDI has really initiated and launched a number of critical activities. They're represented here, too many to go into, but they're geared towards, again, optimizing our data sharing approaches to really learn from each patient in the most impactful ways. And so NCI can also learn what those are and apply them in other studies. So CCDI has begun largely foundationally by establishing an ecosystem that builds upon our existing infrastructure, adding new components and creating a model to store, share, and analyze data in pediatrics that can be expanded again to the entire cancer research community. And the D4CG team is working with NCI on many of these efforts, including incorporating harmonized data models for various cancer types across a number of NCI studies, making clinical and phenotype data openly available, and supporting tools for clinical trials matching in childhood cancers. CCDI is also funding, again, the generation and aggregation of additional clinically based and research-focused data sets, which will be added to our ever-evolving and growing ecosystem framework. And those data are intended to be made widely available in as real time as possible, so that the clinical care and research communities can access and learn from that data for novel discovery and innovation. And this is a shift that NCI has been pushing away from just using data sharing as something that is used, validation, rigor. That's important for the scientific process, but we really do want to get to that discovery and innovation piece, and where people really are seeing data sharing, as we talked about today, for the common good. And of course, as CCDI progresses and moves forward, it is a 10-year initiative. The ecosystem will become a bit more firmly established. We will have ample and diverse data. And so, of course, the later years of this initiative are intended for more of our funding to be concentrated in efforts where we're using and learning from that data so that we can really assess impact and utility can be optimized for the greatest benefit to the cancer community, really, again, as a proof of concept that could be used wider than NCI. So this is a little schematic representative of our CCDI data ecosystem. We are fortunate to have an existing framework to leverage and grow, and that is our NCI Cancer Research Data Commons, which was, again, first recommended and launched with the Cancer Moonshot. And major clinical trials and research studies, as well as population-level data sets, have already been integrated into the CCDI ecosystem and are available to the community. You can see in the yellow box, some of those are listed. And this includes clinical diagnostic grade sequencing data, preclinical in vivo testing data, multiple omics, including genomics, proteogenomics, and proteomics, imaging data from multiple NCI cancer centers and affiliated pediatric hospitals, clinical care and phenotype data, again, as well as population studies through survivorship and public health reporting. And these multivariate data types are available through our ecosystem, both in fit-for-purpose data nodes, like the genomic or proteomic data commons, as well as the National Cancer Registry, or NCCR, which expands upon our SEER framework for population studies. And CCDI is also working with the PCDC team to build a clinical data commons and a participant index, which is more of that honest back-end honest brokering that Sam was alluding to be able to cross-reference patients across these systems. And that will really allow us to help get a complete picture of the individual level patient data across our ecosystem. And again, along with further developing a number of tools and computational methods that will really allow us that improved access analyses of all of these different multimodal data types that are coming from each of our patients. So I'm happy to report that we have a new CCDI hub that was recently launched in the past few months, and you can see the first version here, although this will continue to evolve. This allows various stakeholders to interact with our CCDI ecosystem through a variety of portals and analytic platforms that are accessible by just clicking here on this portal on the various links. And you can see that the CCDI hub is available for all types of end users, from patients and families to biomedical researchers to clinicians. We want everybody to be able to use and access this data. It provides statistics and quick access to CCDI resources that include specific data nodes in the CRDC, as I mentioned. Again, the links to the National Childhood Cancer Registry, and also two critical CCDI knowledge bases that we have developed. One being the CCDI data catalog, which was the very first thing that Dr. Lowy and Dr. Sharpless, when the CCDI was launched, really promised the community. It is a catalog outlining the pediatric data and resources that are available, not just with NCI, but across the cancer research community. And we certainly invite everyone who has a platform or a resource to bring that to us so that we can help make those more findable for the whole community. We also have a molecular targets platform to validate potentially actionable therapeutic targets in childhood cancers. And that really also is helping to validate the targets that are on the FDA's relevant molecular targets list. So a bit more about C3DC, as we like to call it, or the Childhood Cancer Clinical Data Commons, so that we are working with the PCDC team to stand up. It will be modeled on the framework of the PCDC, but is focused on participants that have other data within our NCI ecosystem and repositories. The C3DC will be the primary source for us of individual level demographic and clinical phenotype data for participants, again, that have data files living somewhere within the CCDI ecosystem. The C3DC will allow our users to search harmonized data collected from multiple samples or studies, and really, again, facilitates that longitudinal data collection, use, and analysis that we just heard Sam talking about. And this rich data from children, adolescents, and young adults with pediatric cancers will provide the research community a great opportunity to build those cohorts of interest based on those clinical factors, and further be able to access the associated multimodal data that are available throughout the rest of the ecosystem to analyze and answer new questions. And altogether, that really is going to derive that maximal impact from the data to ultimately benefit children's health. C3DC, on the technical side, for those of you who are interested, will use standard APIs and a common data model to enable cohort analyses and correlative analytics with data and other data type specific nodes, as I mentioned. And the data model has been deposited in GitHub, and we provided that URL here for you. And this graphic really is just a mock-up displaying a summary of some of that participant level data that we were talking about. It does not necessarily represent the final application, but we do anticipate this being available in an MVP form before the end of the year. So we're very excited about that. And just a quick bit about federation. I know that was brought up. So CCDI, as I mentioned, is intended to be a community effort. We know there are many important data sets that are stored and maintained in data repositories outside of NCI and NIH, and those could be by our grantees or other children's hospitals or cancer care centers. And it's important that we connect these data repositories so that that critical information that they hold can be used better by research programs that we're funding. And so connecting or federating data repositories that aren't able to necessarily submit for a number of reasons to a data commons can help us to improve our overall collection, analysis, and use of new and prospective data going forward. It also gives us a flexibility in the quality, diversity, and volume of data that can at least be found and accessed, again, maximizing that opportunity that we want for everybody to use the data and figure out how to drive new innovation. To that end, and because NCI cannot and should not maintain all pediatric cancer data, we are working on a pilot federation effort to connect the CCDI ecosystems with some of these key data systems outside of NCI. Of course, PCDC being among them, and St. Jude was also mentioned, are a part of our pilot with the goal of querying data across these multiple platforms. Our initial effort will be accomplished through building a hybrid API that expands upon known standards with some bespoke elements that can address very specific data types that are held in our various platforms that don't yet have that same level of standard. And our goal, again, is to use this model to learn of opportunities that could be expanded across all of NCI data within our ecosystem, as well as to additional platforms that could become part of our growing interoperable data network. So thank you for your attention today. I know we only had a chance to go into a small bit of what's going on with our data sharing in pediatrics, but again, we are very excited about CCDI being used as an exemplar for NCI to really benefit both individuals and populations, and look forward to working together with each of you in the community to ensure that we really are learning from every child, adolescent, and young adult with cancer for the benefit of the whole community. And that's just some contact information. And I see that something I added in at the last minute didn't get added in, but we do have some RFIs available, and we will hope that you will engage with us, in particular, helping us to find where cancer samples might live that may need to be analyzed. So if you go to our main website, we'll be able to find access to those RFIs as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jamie. It's absolutely wonderful. And I love hearing you speak, because it's like, it's almost too big to get your arms around. And the way you present it is always really helpful to understand the scope. Sometimes I get questions from people about how the C3DC differs from what we're doing in the PCDC. And you know, the easy answer is, you know, PCDC is doing lots of international data and we're working with larger groups. But I don't know if you have any thoughts about how not just PCDC, but all these multiple federated groups, how we can all coexist together, because NCI can't have all the data in one place. So you started to talk about this. Maybe you could say a few more words about sort of the coexisting data commons and how we can think about them.
Absolutely. I hope that we think of them in a complementary fashion. There absolutely will be overlap, and I personally see the benefit in that. We can be cross checks for each other and quality checks. We're each collecting data at different time points on a patient's journey and in different ways. And I think a traditional thought might have been that meant certain data was wrong. I don't think any of the data is wrong. I think it's a different frozen in time snapshot that we have to put together, and we have to piece those individual bits of information into this larger framework. And I think putting more data together from these different sites with different views, with different tools on them, will help us to do that. And I have a slide that I wish I had here just for quick reference, but I think it's really important that we tend to think of data as coming together in one way. But there are many ways to bring that data and many angles, and we don't even see them really until we put a new lens on it. And we're so used to all the different apps on our phone doing this, right? Our applications use a lot of crossover data on the back end, and they deliver it in different ways and individualized to what different groups need or want. And I'm hoping, as you were pointing out also in your slides before my talk, that we can get to that space. We can gamify this, if you will, and we can get to a learning health model that will speak to each user the way they need to hear and receive the information. So that's what I'm hoping from the Federation.
I love that. I hadn't really thought about that as these multiple sources being quality controls for each other. I think that's a really great idea. And we're going to learn a lot from looking at the rigid clinical trial data against the EHR data that we're extracting and seeing how those line up. So I really love that perspective, Jamie. Great. We're going to move on. I really appreciate you doing this. It's great to hear, and we look forward to getting an update in the future. And yeah, we're just excited to be partners with you, Jamie. So thanks so much for coming and supporting us.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move ahead. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the larger mission of Data for the Common Good. And I'm going to start by talking about Gearbox. And I've spoken about Gearbox before. This is a project that has been launched by the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society in support of their pediatric acute leukemia project, which we've been a big part of, both from the Data Commons generation side, as well as the Gearbox clinical trials matching. And through a combined vision with LLS, we've been able to build this first version of Gearbox. And I want to just give you a little bit of insight into our expansion plans. Gearbox is a clinical trials matching tool. Right now it's customized for AML based on our work with LLS and their PEDAL project, now Dare to Dream. It's available. It's open to the public. It's focused, as I said, on AML trials. And anybody who wants to watch a demo can watch a video, or you can actually go to the Gearbox platform itself and try it out. And the way Gearbox works is we pull in all the information from available clinical trials that we can. And right now, most of that information is stored on clinicaltrials.gov, but we've learned that there are going to be other sources of clinical trial information. And what we do is we make that information available to clinicians through an easy-to-use interface to find matches for their patients. We are going to be expanding Gearbox to include additional trials, not just for AML, but for other groups as well. We're going to add in a lot of new features. So right now it's a bit cumbersome when it comes to matching the patients and putting in the features. So we're going to be adding in new ways to match patients. We're going to have more automatic ingestion of the clinical and genomic data from third parties and from electronic health records. And then we're going to expand across additional tumor types. So we've been lucky to get funding from the ICI Foundation, as well as an NCI U01 grant to expand Gearbox now to cover many other tumor types. The automated abstraction I'll talk a little bit about, but it's not going to be easy. And I have a lot to say about how clinical trials are authored, but we feel like we have a way forward to pull out the criteria from clinical trials. On the right is a demo that we showed recently of neuroblastoma trials that are in a staging version of Gearbox, not the publicly available version. Here are two pictures of the interface. On the left is showing some of the, I think those are some of the germ cell trials. You can see how as you enter in features for each patient, it will sort the trials and match versus unmatched. These are things you could do anyway if you downloaded the trial and look through all the criteria. And we're just providing a really streamlined way to match patients and trials together. You could then look at information about the trial. You can even look at the Boolean logic as to why your patient's a match or not, which can be really helpful in understanding, the one or two criteria that are preventing someone from matching to a trial. We think this is incredibly useful in its current form, but the innovations that we're going to be making in terms of the interface, the automated extraction, the other trials we're adding in, as well as streamlining the whole process, we think are going to make this incredibly useful. We are looking at using machine learning and other tools to either do better extraction of criteria from clinical trials, as well as doing better matching of patients. So this was a paper that we recently published looking at automated matching of patients to clinical trials. And I think this is early days for using AI for these types of things. Clinical trials, as you know, as you've heard me rant about, they're written in Microsoft Word most of the time. They're not very standardized. The criteria for inclusion, exclusion, for order sets, for follow-up studies, they're not standardized, and it's a real pain to get the information out. So as we develop these AI tools, we hope that there is a parallel movement within the industry to standardize the way clinical trials are authored. That's going to have to come from the top, from HHS, and it's going to have to, pharma companies will have to buy into it. But we're ready to help whenever those groups are ready to move forward with understanding how we could develop standards around doing this. Okay, so I want to switch from Gearbox to talk a little bit about our Sociome data commons, because we got a lot of feedback from the last webinar that people want to hear more about the Sociome commons. The Sociome is really the entire lived life of the patient. We often talk about social determinants of health, but Sociome is really more broad than that. It could be things like, does the patient live in a happy home? If somebody is doing a lot of physical activity, is that physical activity because they're working on a construction crew or because they teach spin class? Those are two very types of different physical activity that I think will have different impacts on the patient's health outcome. And ultimately, we want to try to answer questions like, hey, if you're from a poorer neighborhood, do you have a greater chance of doing poorly on a particular trial versus another trial, or versus somebody who lives in a higher income neighborhood? These are the kinds of questions we want to ask. So we want to integrate these social determinants of health with these other factors. This is a multidisciplinary study right now that's going on at University of Chicago with our partners and our Institute for Translational Medicine, which are partners from all around Chicago, as well as working with Argonne National Lab. So this is a very exciting project that's very local to Chicago, but what we're building, we hope to expand to many, many other geographic areas. So we have an internal version of the Sociome Data Commons, which is really it's a very wonky platform for those who want to look at the data. But we've spent the past year sourcing data sets, pollution, green space, weather, noise, an amazing amount of data that we are making fair, so findable and accessible, interoperable, reusable. We're putting it up on our site, and we're making sure that people will have access to these data sets to study their patients. So one of the first things that we did was a pilot study looking at pediatric asthma. We know that kids on the south side of Chicago and in poorer areas have worse outcomes for asthma. And so one of the things we wanted to try to understand is, could we model those outcomes based on Sociome factors? So we spent a long time accumulating different data sets around environmental exposures, public safety, demographics, access to public transportation, property values, and so forth. And we built a pipeline here where we can take all these data sets, try to understand what are the most important factors to have in a data set, and then curate them until we have the most impactful data for our research. And then what we do is that we take the data and then we geocode the patient's information and we hook it together. So we know for each patient where they live and where they spend their time. And then we can look at things like violent crime and poverty and flood susceptibility. And then we can create a multivariable model to understand if their outcome in asthma is related to these Sociome factors and not just clinical factors. So it's early days for this work. We're just finishing up our various aspects of this first asthma project. But what we're really interested in building is a generalized platform. So somebody could come forward and say, hey, for brain tumors in Illinois, can you show me an association with seasonality or with weather or with distance to a highway or something? So we want to be able to make those studies easy to do. And I think that once we democratize access to the Sociome data, we'll have lots of groups coming to us who want to do something similar with their data. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about our approach to data commons in general for rare diseases. We've been talking about pediatric cancer, which is incredibly rare, and we've, I think, done a good job tackling various aspects of pediatric cancer. And then the work that we've done, we realize is really applicable to many other areas. And as Caitlin mentioned, this really powered the change from being the pediatric cancer data commons to being data for the common good. The model is the same. Lack of data will hinder research into rare diseases. The lack of community consensus around standards make it impossible or really difficult to aggregate data. And we know that researchers need high quality aggregated data, standardized data to do their research. So our method works across any rare disease. We talk about a big tent, and coming up, Dr. Philipson, I hope, will talk about the challenges of creating this big tent for, in his case, for monogenic diabetes. We want everybody to be involved. We want to figure out who that collaborator is that's been difficult, and who that person in another country is who doesn't want to share data. We want to get all those people together, not because we want to go after, say we need your data. We want their brain. We want their information, their approach to the problem, how they would build a data dictionary, how we would create an aggregated data set. This has never failed us, and we've time and time again engaged the community in a productive way. And this is not unique to pediatric cancer, and now we're showing that it works over any type of rare disease. The data operations piece is incredibly important, and that's really how we started, right? These were our bones, making data dictionaries and creating consensus. Everything we do is published on our website. We make it all open source. We have a tried and true process now for assembling data collection tools and producing a dictionary, and this works across any area, not just cancer. The governance is critical. As you know, Susie is our full-time governance person who works on contracts and MOUs and sharing agreements and working, and we've never not been able to put a sharing agreement in place with groups all over the world. And it just takes a lot of persistence, but we always get there. The infrastructure team that Brian and Luca run are incredibly adept at creating ways for users to get at standardized data and to do cohort discovery and to create opportunities for create opportunities for data download. And as I mentioned, the data operations that Michael runs are incredibly important at creating these standardized set of data and the model, which then go into the platform, which allows us to create this faceted search that everybody has been using. So I'd encourage everyone to get in there and to use the portal. One of the other cool things about this is that since our data are all standardized, it is possible that if somebody had a different portal or a different infrastructure that they wanted to display their data in, we could help them do that, or they could do that on their own. Because the data are aggregated and standardized, that wouldn't be that heavy of a lift to produce a different way to look at the data. But we've been very fortunate to work with the Gen3 platform and to extend it in ways that allow us to provide this cohort discovery to the community. And then something we don't talk about enough is how we socialize and sustain our data commons. We have lots of materials, everything from a YouTube channel to all the website information that Caitlin produces that allow us to post all this information. And then sustainability is absolutely critical. We've been very fortunate with some of our funders to sustain the commons, but going forward over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to have to come up with more long-term solutions for how we generate funding to maintain the data commons and then build new ones. So we think this is a sustainable model for transforming human health. I think the rare diseases especially require collaboration and sharing of data. We've really tried to stick to very rare diseases because that's where I think we really shine, which is getting groups from around the world to work together. If you're studying diseases that are very common, there's a lot less impetus to create these international sharing groups. We have to work from a foundation of trust and consensus, and this is at the top for a reason, because none of this works if people aren't working together and trusting each other to do this. Connecting disparate data types is something that we do really well, especially with our data standards group, creating better ways to standardize our clinical data so that it can be connected to other types of data like genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, all the types that Jaime talked about in the cancer ecosystem. And we're really pushing the early adoption of these standards. And again, this is not specific to cancer. If you're going to design the next Crohn's trial, you should use standardized data collection forms that are bound to common data elements. And this is where we can really help groups to find better ways to collect data. The entire life cycle of data is what's important. How the data are collected and created, how they're used, how the data are sustained, and ultimately maintaining governance throughout the entire life cycle. So these are all things that I think are really important, not just for cancer data, but for all data. So as Caitlin mentioned at the top, our mission is to decrease barriers to accessing data to help improve human health. And now we've done this, very well in pediatric cancer. We're working in other areas like the sociome. We have other initiatives that we're working on that we hope to be able to announce in the coming months and year. And for right now, I'd like to talk a little bit about our monogenic diabetes commons. And we're very fortunate to have Louis Philipson here to talk about the work we're doing together. So Dr. Philipson is going to talk about the PREDICT effort that we're working on. He's professor of diabetes research here at University of Chicago. He established and created the Kovler Diabetes Center, which is a world-renowned center for diabetes here at the University of Chicago. He's a world expert in monogenic diabetes, but more importantly, he's been a really good friend and collaborator for many years. We've had several projects together. Dr. Philipson is very astute when it comes to understanding how to put large projects like this together, and he's been a really great partner in helping us understand how to engage the diabetes community. So I am going to, hopefully Dr. Philipson will come on video and come off of mute, and I'm going to run your slides for you if that's okay. Just tell me when to advance.
That would be great. So yeah, this is terrific, and I'm just going to really speak for a few minutes. So I thank you, Sam, for all the kind words. It has been terrific working with you guys. I have to say, as my team knows, in some cases, you've dragged me in kicking and screaming into this world of interoperability and talking to other diabetes teams. We had a meeting yesterday with actually folks at CHOP for understanding how their monogenic efforts might work with ours, and it turns out it's complicated, as we'll say, but your team has been really amazing in trying to do this. So I'm going to spend maybe 10 minutes talking about, maybe less, talking about our monogenic diabetes efforts. So the next slide, if we can see that. There we go. So I just wanted, so since this is maybe to put it mildly, a mixed audience, and there might not be even an understanding of what monogenic diabetes is, people who do understand diabetes even a little bit know that there's maybe two main types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. That's on the left of this slide. Type 1 is considered to be strictly autoimmune these days. If you don't have a pancreas, it's really maybe a subset of type 2 because it isn't, strictly speaking, autoimmunity. The LADA box is called latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, so that is probably a slow form of type 1 that happens in adults. There's various less defined forms that are in between, including this thing called ketosis-prone diabetes. But most people have type 2 diabetes, which is great, except we don't know why it happens, what causes it, or what the best treatments are. But that's our big box of something like 38 million people in the United States. Now, after type 1 and type 2 and those other sort of subtypes, there's a great deal of heterogeneity. So what we've been studying at the University of Chicago with my teachers, Ken Polanski and Graham Bell and others at the University of Michigan, Steve Fiennes, who died about 10 years ago, are monogenic causes of diabetes that are dominantly inherited. So this is not a lot of folks. We think maybe 300,000 to 400,000 people in the United States have one of these upwards of 15 or more different kinds of genes. And you can see we've divided them up in these sort of, again, monogenic, mostly dominantly inherited single gene mutations. They could include deletions, splicing problems, and in some cases, imprinting issues. But we have MODY, which is the adult form for the most part, or even older children, maturity onset diabetes of youth. And there are multiple genes, including some genes that might be familiar to some of the cancer folks, HNF1 alpha being also implicated in somatic mutations in hepatocellular carcinoma. Then we have a bunch of genes associated with neonatal diabetes. And then there's a variety of other forms of early onset diabetes and young adult diabetes that are more or less syndromic. And you might put things like cystic fibrosis in there because there's cystic fibrosis associated diabetes. There are more complicated forms that are multifactorial, including Wolfram or mitochondrial disease. So there's lots of stuff associated with a very small percentage of unusual causes of diabetes. That's really the whole takeaway here. And some of them are exceedingly small. So what we've been doing is recognizing that monogenic diabetes is sort of a rare disease. In aggregate, it doesn't quite make the rare disease definition because, as I said, 300,000 to 400,000 people, but each particular one is much less. And so we have some entities like HNF4 alpha mutations or HNF1 beta mutations, which we only have in some cases a little over 100, or in some cases even tens of subjects in our registry at the University of Chicago. And as far as we know, we have one of the largest registries in the country. And then, for example, we have mitochondrial diseases, which in some cases also have diabetes as a part of the phenotype, we, for example, may have 10 pedigrees in our registry. So how do we do this? Because you can't ask questions with such small n's, even though on the aggregate, there are a fair number of folks, but each gene has a different set of outcomes and possible complications. So what we're trying to do is collect data from a large number of groups to avoid this problem, or at least get around the problem of data being siloed. And many questions are only answerable when you have a large enough data set. So using the data for the common good model and their undying help here, we've been trying to organize a consortium of diabetes groups, not only around the country, but around the world, to aggregate this data set, but also to harmonize the data set. So as Sam said, one of the big problems is that each registry has a different kind of database nomenclature. And so how do we get around that? How do we harmonize the data set so that if it's possible to accumulate these cases in one data set, we could interrogate them to answer questions that are otherwise unanswerable? So how did this happen? Well, again, because of the several-year relationship that Sam and I have had personally and the teams, we put together the data for the common group with our monogenic group. So on the top are folks in our monogenic group, and I want to point out Michael McCullough, who's on the far right, who's been sort of the heart and soul of this effort. And then the other folks have been key. My colleagues, Professors Siri Greeley and Rochelle Naylor, who are to my immediate right. And then in the middle is Lisa Letourneau, who's been the manager of our project now for quite a few years, and also other projects related to monogenic diabetes, and Bala Kandasamy, who's one of our postdocs, and Tiana, who is also helping, but has also moved on. And then on the bottom, of course, you see the data for the common good team. So to put these folks together has been terrific and challenging, but I think we've been helping each other and learning a lot as we go on. So the whole idea was how to use the model that you've heard about for not only cancers and the sociome, but now for these rare types of diabetes. So where we are right now is, first you have to conceive of the idea. So could we have to start with, a national monogenic diabetes data commons? And what would that look like? And how can we use the experience of the group to get this going? So first of all, we have to find people to understand this is important. So that was the easy part once we decided to press the go button. And then how to engage them, how to understand how to make the data work. To be able to share data, the very first job is to make a data dictionary that everyone could buy into, and that they would then be able to translate their existing registry data into that system. One of the beauties of doing this right now is that there's been a surge of interest after only discovering these things in between 1995 and say 2003. There's a surge of interest over the last 5 years or so, 5 to 10 years, that monogenic diabetes is kind of the poster child for precision medicine in diabetes. Because given that we have a single gene that in many of these cases is causing diabetes, it means we have specific treatments, specific outcomes, specific things that might happen because of that particular gene defect that we have to understand. So using this system, the first step is still going on. So that's the data dictionary to work through it in an extremely detailed, tedious way to be sure that the various registries can align. But as I was saying, one of the nice things about doing it now is that groups that have not yet formed a registry, but have started to accumulate patients in their clinic, can start from scratch with the existing data dictionary that has been adopted. So they're very excited about that. That's one of the things we talked about with some of the other centers most recently, and that's where we are right now. And then the next step, which Michael is working on, is to get the various memorandum of understanding signed at the various groups, and then things will proceed. Of course, we have to sign various agreements about the data use agreements. And part of this is to reassure everyone that when they send their children out into the world, they still retain some control. So we want to be sure they understand that they're not losing their data. They'll be able to have collaborators, people from outside their groups will be able to ask questions, refer them subjects or patients when there's when there's clear expertise in one set or the other. So that's where we are right now, having had the kickoff internally, about 18 months ago, and then about 10 months ago, the first meeting with external groups, and then here we are now signing the agreements. This is a list of some of the places that have already either signed on or are in the process of signing agreements. In some cases, there's sort of multiple groups within each institution that have to work together to do this. And so in some cases, we're having groups for the first time talk to each other through us. So it's very exciting. And the fact that so many different major medical centers with impact in diabetes are interested in doing this has been just terrific. And so you understand the goal by harmonizing all of these existing registries. We hope to identify persons with unusual forms of diabetes to better understand things like natural history, complications, minor issues, how to understand children who are positive for a mutation who may not yet have the expression of diabetes, and again, long-term outcomes done in a linear fashion, as we're collecting not only onset data, but also data that can be done as we watch them in a time delimited way. So it's something that most of the centers have not yet done. So Sam, that's really all I wanted to say about monogenic diabetes. I think we're excited about being part of the program. I think if anything, what I think we've talked about is how we can be a model for perhaps other conditions, illnesses, diseases, where having a consortium is actually critical to what we're trying to do.
So I just have to ask, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you, how do we take this international? So what are going to be the next steps to, I know we've identified some collaborators in the UK and other places, but what are your thoughts about how we can take this the next step as we're working with the US institutions first?
Well, and there's a number of different questions. The first is to make sure that we even start talking. And so that has already started to happen. So we have groups in several countries who are clearly interested. One of the pushbacks has been how difficult it is to get the registries to correspond or to even start a registry if they don't have one. So one of the things we're trying to understand is how can we help them get funding? So for the domestic ones, the idea, of course, is that once we put this together, it will be fundable. And so we're thinking, how can we fund some fraction of an FTE at each one of the participating institutions going forward? So that's certainly on the books. For the international groups, it depends on their resources. And what we're trying to do is make it as simple as possible. One of the things we thought about is, can we help them merge their data dictionary with the sort of the one that's going to rule them all? And how we do that, I think, will dictate success of getting the other groups involved.
And then just one final question before we go. What has anything surprised you about this process? I know you weren't always overly optimistic about it, but has any part of it surprised you in terms of how people are working together?
Absolutely. I'm pleasantly surprised by the level of interest. I think once people understood that the questions were never going to be addressed without getting some bigger ends, they just wanted to know, how can they sign on? Now, some of them have dropped out from the initial meetings because they recognize that it's very tedious, or they don't really have enough interest, or they don't have the resources to do this. But in some cases, the MOUs or the data use agreements can be extremely tedious. So we have to be sure that we keep the momentum up, and they've been agreeable. So that's the pleasant surprise. Even 6 to 8 months for a data use agreement doesn't seem to be unusual. But at least we can assure them that the University of Chicago is no easier than their institution in getting these agreements signed. So it's been, I think the enthusiasm of the other groups has been very positive, and the fact that my team has been very excited about doing this and laboriously working with your team to get the details going, it's been terrific.
But to be clear, because you glossed over it, the bottleneck is sometimes funding, right? And if we had more funding, we could get some of these other institutions to harmonize their data and be participants, right?
Well, that's right. I think that, that does require some percentage of at least some person to actually do the work. And of course, in our case, we do have funding. We have an R1 that's helping. We have parts of a U54 that have some useful overlap, at least for the personnel in place, so that we can take parts of a person who's already in place. But it's hard. I mean, frankly, again, in the conversation we just had yesterday, there's interest. They have, I think they mentioned maybe 100 people in their existing registry, but to map all the data and to do that requires them to actually have a person to do it. So exactly how we can help them do that is not completely clear. We think that, if we have the registry going and we show that there's some initial progress and we can answer some questions and have a publication, that should lead to a possible funding source with a consortium.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Philipson. This is really great. It's inspiring working with you and your team, and we look forward to giving an update next year about our progress.
I'm sure there'll be a lot. Thanks so much. We've had really great fun with this.
Awesome. Thank you. So we have a lot of resources for those that want to get involved. In addition to being at this webinar and telling all your friends about us, you can come and explore the portal and get in and do some cohort discovery and generate some survival curves. You can look at the data dictionaries that are on our website. We encourage you to tell other people about the dictionaries, to share them. We want people to understand how much work goes into these and how they should be using them about future data collection. And if you want to get involved with any of our consortia or any of our advisory groups, please contact myself or contact Susie, and we can triage your questions and your requests, because we'd love to have more people involved, not just physicians and researchers, but advocates, patients, anybody else who wants to be involved. We'd love to get them onto some of these groups together. Definitely should sign up for our email list. You probably are if you know about this webinar, but you should definitely sign up for our quarterly newsletters. We are always looking for new and exciting scientists to hire and project managers and data experts. So take a look at the jobs that are up on our website. We have several positions that are posted, and there'll be several more in the coming year, hopefully. So keep an eye on that. And you'll see us around the world over the next 2 months. We'll be in Dublin at the CTOS meeting. That's the bone tumor meeting. And then at the same time, our team will also be going to Pittsburgh for the Oncofertility Consortium meeting. Several of us will be in Paris for an international childhood cancer data partnership, including myself, Susie Burrs, as well as Jaime, who just spoke, will be there as well. And then several of us will be at the ASH meeting in San Diego. There may be other things that pop up this year, and we're already filling up our travel calendar for next year. So we'd love to hear about those of you who will be at these meetings who want to get together and visit with us. Just mention our funders. We are very, very lucky to have generous funding from the foundations and groups listed here. These are the ones that have funded the work over the past 2 years, and we look forward to continuing to work with them. You can contact Bobby, who's our development expert, if you want to talk about more ways to help sustain our work and to help us with identifying what our expectations for data sharing are, as well as helping us raise future funds. So again, thank you to everyone, our collaborators, our funders, our patients and families, especially our patients and families. And I think I've left us all of 8 minutes for a 20-minute Q&A, right, Caitlin?
That's all right. We've got some good questions in already. You'll see that some members of the Data for the Common Good team have joined us as panelists. We have Brian, our Senior Director of Technology and Data Standards, Ellen, who's Deputy Director, Luca, who is Director of Infrastructure, Michael, who leads our data modeling, and Inal, who's a Senior Project Manager and knows a lot about consortium building. So we've already gotten a few great questions. Please don't hesitate to ask more. If we don't get to them in this time, we'll follow up with you and answer them. But I'm going to start by giving Sam a break and pitching a question to Brian, which is going back to when Sam was talking about the long-term follow-up and asking about the honest broker system and what kind of tech would be behind that.
Yeah, so I think Jaime answered a part of the question in that the NCI, as part of the CCDI work is developing a CCDI participant index, and I may get some of this wrong, and please feel free to correct me where I misstate things, Jamie. But individual sites would be able to provide essentially a set of IDs that map to other IDs, and then the CCDI participant index essentially will be a service that will function to allow for some of this disambiguation of individuals that may have identifiers across multiple systems. So that is certainly one path here for honest brokering. And then another, which I alluded to in a response in the Q&A, is essentially a direct participant submission of data through their electronic health record system. And so a number of EHRs like Epic do support either natively within their portals or through third-party apps, the ability for individuals to contribute data either for the purposes of care or for the purpose or other purposes like research, to be able to provide EHR data directly to other parties, and permitting. So this will be something that we'll be likely exploring as part of the long-term follow-up project, is a way for individuals to provide their own data once they've consented to do so, and by them providing data from multiple systems, multiple health systems where they may be being seen, essentially the linkage there is done for us because it's provided by the patient. So I think there's a couple of approaches that we'll likely be exploring here in terms of sort of linkage and honest brokering of those data. It's a really great question.
And I will follow that up with another question on that same topic, just to keep those all together, which was about in as much of the initiative originates from the pediatric world, how much engagement of the adult hospitals will be needed, particularly for harvesting long-term data from EHRs following transition to adult care. And I think that may be related to a question we got in the chat, also asking for the cloud-based computable consent sharing EHR data. What are the biggest barriers in creating that?
I know that question's not directed to me, but I'll make the comment as a survivorship doc that it's very, very challenging when patients leave the pediatric world. Patients, after their cancer treatment's done, at some point they go off into the community, and they go off into community sites that may have different EHRs, may not have an EHR, and that is definitely a challenge. What I loved about Sam's slide, which I've already taken a screenshot and shared with other folks, I hope that's okay. But what I love about that is staying in touch with the patient, and it's maintaining contact with the patient as the point person, as opposed to really focusing on going to the health system and tracking health systems. So I do think that direct patient contact will be key as our patients, our AYAs, grow up and sort of live their lives, which is what we hope they will do.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Tim.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think there are also probably lessons that we could learn from NCI, and especially in regards to, very, very long-term longitudinal studies for cancer cohorts or pre-cancer cohorts like CONNECT, where they've done major studies on this, and learning about methods of maintaining contact over long periods of time that have worked and haven't worked, I think would be wise for us to heed.
And we're keeping I know we're almost out of time. We're keeping our hands on a lot of initiatives centered around the Cancer Moonshot and around CCDI, and doing EHR data extraction, both in the pediatric world and then working with the M-Code folks on adult cancer. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and I think we're trying to stay in the tech so that once the opportunities come around, we'll be able to leverage them to get at the data. But you're right, it's just as much a social engineering problem as it is a technical one.
Do we want to do one more question, or should we wrap it up? we had a really interesting questions asking, can LLMs help reimagine matching patients to trials? I don't know if you can squeeze your answer into 1 minute.
We've talked about this a lot, or how are the new AI tools helping us? And I think we need to be thinking about these tools both in terms of how we analyze data. So we were already seeing people take large amounts of imaging data and use them for really innovative studies using some of these artificial intelligence methods. But now on the user side, imagine a ChatGPT-like interface for cohort discovery or for clinical trials matching. We're obviously thinking about these technologies, and I think over the next year or two, as we expand our efforts, we're going to have to take a close look at how these technologies will help us build better interfaces for patients and caregivers. I think it's a really exciting time. As we've seen many times, though, these tools are quite fallible and confidently wrong, and so we have to make sure that as we move into this space that we do it with our eyes open to the ways the tools can help and also the caveats in using them.
Thanks, Sam. So that is bringing us to the end of our 2 hours, and thank you all so much. I want to conclude with one more huge thank you to our guest speakers today, and also to everyone here for taking the time out of your day to join us. We love this event, and it is just really heartening to see so much of our community join us for it. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be following up with a recording and the slides from today. And when this webinar ends, you will see that short anonymous feedback survey pop up in your browser. And we so appreciate any thoughts you want to share. You can always reach out to our team with your ideas, your questions. We love hearing from you. And we will see you next year, but hopefully before then at many other events.